The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus pushed his cleaning cart down the marble hallway of St. Catherine's Medical Center, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. It was 2:47 a.m., and exhaustion pulled at his bones like gravity itself had doubled its strength. But Marcus couldn't afford to be tired. Not when his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, needed new school supplies. Not when the rent was due in 5 days. Not when every dollar he earned scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins meant another meal on their table, another night with the heat on, another small piece of the life he'd promised to give her after her mother walked away 3 years ago. He'd become invisible in these hallways, just another blue uniform pushing a cart, unnoticed by doctors discussing cases in hushed tones, ignored by visitors clutching flowers and worry. Marcus had made peace with invisibility. It was safer that way. Easier. You couldn't disappoint people who didn't see you in the first place. But tonight, everything was about to change. Marcus was cleaning the executive wing, a section of the hospital reserved for the wealthy elite who could afford private suites with city views and gourmet meals. He usually worked this floor last, when the corridors were empty and silent. As he approached Suite 1207, he noticed something unusual. The door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could hear a man's broken sobs, raw, desperate sounds that seemed to claw their way out of a chest too tight to hold them. He should have kept walking. It wasn't his business. But something in those sobs reminded Marcus of the sounds he'd made into his pillow the night his wife left, when Emma was asleep and couldn't hear her father fall apart. Marcus knocked gently. The sobbing stopped. "Housekeeping," he said softly. "Just need to empty the trash. I can come back if." "Come in." The voice was thick with tears and resignation. The man sitting beside the hospital bed looked nothing like Marcus had expected. His suit probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months, but it was rumpled and wrinkled as if he'd been sleeping in it. His salt and pepper hair stood in wild directions from running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that struck Marcus, red-rimmed, hollow, containing a depth of despair that money clearly couldn't fix. In the bed lay a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, connected to various machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference. Her face was serene, almost peaceful, but there was an unsettling stillness to her that made Marcus's heart clench. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly, moving to grab the small trash bin. "I'll be quick. She's been like this for 4 months. The man's voice was barely a whisper. "My daughter, Sophia. Car accident. The doctors say she's in a persistent vegetative state. They want me to." He couldn't finish the sentence, his voice breaking into fragments. Marcus froze. He should leave. He should offer a quick condolence and disappear back into his safe invisibility. Instead, he found himself setting down the trash bin and looking at the young woman more closely. Something about her face reminded him of Emma, the gentle curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell across the pillow. "May I?" Marcus gestured toward the bed. The man looked confused but nodded. Marcus approached slowly, and as he drew closer, he noticed something the man probably couldn't see from his position. The young woman's eyelids were fluttering. Not much, just the tiniest movement, but it was there. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think she might be in there. Really in there." The man, whose name Marcus would later learn was Richard Ashford, founder of Ashford Industries, stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "What do you mean? The doctors have run every test. They said." "I know what they said," Marcus interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "But look, really look at her eyes." Richard moved closer, his breath catching as he saw what Marcus had noticed. "I don't understand. They said there was no brain activity, no response to stimuli. Do you have something that meant a lot to her? Something from before the accident?" Marcus asked. Richard's hand went to his pocket, pulling out a small, worn teddy bear. "She carried this everywhere as a child. I've kept it with me since this happened. But the doctors said she can't respond to memories, that she can't." "Let me try something," Marcus said. "Please." Something in Marcus's voice, maybe the certainty, maybe the compassion, made Richard hand over the bear without question. Marcus moved to the bedside and leaned close to Sophia's ear. He'd done this countless times with Emma when she had nightmares, when her fever spiked and she drifted in that scary space between sleep and waking. "Sophia," he said softly, pressing the bear gently against her hand. Your father is here. He loves you so much. He's been here every single day, waiting for you. And I know you're tired. I know it's easier to stay where you are. But he needs you to come back. Can you feel this? This is Mr. Buttons. Remember Mr. Buttons. The room fell silent except for the machines. Richard held his breath, tears streaming down his face. Marcus continued talking, his voice low and soothing, telling Sophia about the world waiting for her, about the father who refused to give up, about all the mornings that needed her and them. And then, so subtle that Richard almost missed it, Sophia's fingers twitched against the bear. Did you see that? Richard gasped. Did you? Keep talking to her, Marcus urged. Tell her about something good. Something she loved. Richard dropped to his knees beside the bed, clutching his daughter's hand. He began talking about their trip to Paris when she was 16, about the crepes they ate by the Seine, about how she'd laughed so hard she'd snorted, and they'd laughed even harder at that. His voice was shaking, but it was filled with love, with memory, with hope. Sophia's eyelids fluttered more noticeably now. Her fingers curled slightly around the bear. And then, after 4 months of silence, her lips moved, forming a single, breathy word, Papa. Richard's sob could have shattered glass. He pressed his forehead against her hand, his shoulders shaking. Marcus stepped back quietly, trying to give them privacy, but Richard reached out and grabbed his arm with surprising strength. What's your name? Richard demanded. Marcus. Marcus Johnson. Marcus, you just gave me my daughter back. How did you know? How did you? I'm a father too, Marcus said simply. I know what love looks like. And I could see yours. I could feel it in this room. Over the next hour, as doctors rushed in and began running tests, as Sophia slowly, miraculously began responding to stimuli, Marcus tried to slip away. But Richard wouldn't let him leave without getting his full name, his phone number, every piece of information he could extract. 3 weeks later, Marcus was called into the hospital administrator's office. He went with his heart hammering, convinced he'd violated some protocol, crossed some invisible line. Instead, he found Richard Ashford waiting for him. Sophia had made a remarkable recovery. The doctors couldn't explain it, whether it was the timing, the stimulation, or something else entirely, but she was awake, alert, and improving daily. And Richard Ashford had not forgotten the janitor who saw what no one else had seen. I owe you everything, Richard said. Name it. Anything. Money, a house, a job. I don't want your money, Marcus interrupted. I was just doing what anyone would do. But that's where you're wrong, Richard said quietly. No one else did. Dozens of doctors, nurses, specialists, they all saw the test results and gave up. You saw my daughter. You saw her humanity when everyone else saw a case file. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I have a daughter too. Emma. She's 7. And I thought, what if that was her? What if everyone gave up on her? Someone had to look. Someone had to really see. Richard studied him for a long moment. You work nights as a janitor. Yes, sir. And during the day, I take care of Emma. Make her breakfast, walk her to school, pick her up. Help with homework. Be there for every moment I can be there for. And you're exhausted. Marcus smiled tiredly. Every day. But she's worth it. Richard nodded slowly. Marcus, I'm not going to insult you by throwing money at you. But I am going to ask you something. Sophia wants to meet you. Will you come? Marcus went that weekend, bringing Emma with him. Sophia was sitting up in bed, still weak but radiant with life. When she saw Marcus, tears filled her eyes. You called me back, she said. I heard you. I was so far away, and everything was quiet and peaceful, and then I heard this voice telling me my papa needed me. And I couldn't ignore it. Emma, shy at first, had brought a drawing she'd made, a picture of an angel with a cleaning cart. That's my daddy, she explained seriously to Sophia. He's a real-life superhero, but his costume is a janitor uniform. The room filled with laughter and tears, and something shifted in that moment, an invisible bridge built between two families from completely different worlds. Richard kept his word about not just throwing money at Marcus. Instead, he offered him something more valuable, an opportunity. The Ashford Foundation was launching a new patient advocacy program, focusing on training healthcare workers to recognize signs that machines and tests might miss. They needed someone to run it, someone who understood both the clinical environment and the human element. Someone who could train others to really see patients as people. Marcus almost said no. He wasn't qualified. He didn't have a degree. He was just a janitor who'd gotten lucky. But Richard pushed back gently, and so did Sophia, who'd decided that Marcus had become family. You have the most important qualification, Sophia insisted. You have a heart that sees people. Everything else can be learned. The new position paid enough that Marcus could work normal hours, be home with Emma every night, and still save for her future. But more than that, it gave him purpose. Over the next year, Marcus trained hundreds of healthcare workers in compassionate observation, teaching them to look beyond charts and scans, to see the flutter of an eyelid, the twitch of a finger, the subtle signs of consciousness that machines couldn't measure. His program saved 17 patients in the first year alone, people who were on the verge of being declared hopeless, whose families were preparing to say goodbye. Marcus found them in that space between gone and here, and he called them back with patience, persistence, and profound humanity. Emma grew up watching her father transform from an invisible janitor to a respected patient advocate. But more importantly, she learned the lesson that Marcus lived every day, that kindness isn't about grand gestures or wealth or status. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, in their moments of deepest need and choosing to show up anyway. On the 5th anniversary of Sophia's awakening, the Ashfords threw a celebration. Sophia, now healthy and working as a counselor for coma patients' families, stood to give a speech. But she called Marcus up beside her. 5 years ago, I was gone, she said, her voice clear and strong. And a man who had every reason to stay invisible chose to see me instead. Marcus didn't save me because he wanted recognition or reward. He saved me because he's a father who understands that every person in every hospital bed is someone's entire world. And he couldn't walk past that. She turned to Marcus, tears streaming down her face. You gave me my life back. But more than that, you showed me what it means to be truly human. You showed all of us. Marcus, uncomfortable with the attention as always, tried to deflect. But Emma, now 12 and wise beyond her years, stood up from her seat and joined her father and Sophia on the stage. My dad always says he's nothing special, Emma said to the crowd. He says he was just doing his job. But I think being brave enough to care when you're exhausted, being kind enough to see people when you're invisible yourself, that's the most special thing in the world. That's the thing that changes everything. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus was looking at Emma, his eyes shining. Because in the end, that was the real miracle, not that he'd helped wake a billionaire's daughter, but that in doing so, he'd shown his own daughter that their circumstances didn't define their capacity for compassion. That a janitor's hands could heal just as surely as a surgeon's. That love and attention and really seeing people, that was the most powerful medicine in the world. And it didn't cost a single dollar.